I made a deal with the devil on a Tuesday. That detail matters somehow. Not a Friday, when bad decisions feel almost poetic. Not a Saturday, when the world gives you permission to be reckless. A Tuesday, gray, ordinary, smelling of coffee gone cold and the particular kind of despair that comes with opening your sister's text message at 7 a.m, before your feet have even touched the floor. The wedding is in 3 weeks, Amelia. 3 weeks. Please tell me you're bringing someone this time. Mom already asked twice, and I'm tired of making excuses for you. I read it 4 times. Then I set my phone face down on the nightstand, stared at the water stain on my apartment ceiling, the one shaped vaguely like a bird mid-flight, or maybe a hand reaching for something it would never catch. And I thought about how my sister had a talent, a genuine gift, for making concern sound exactly like contempt. Her name was Vanessa. She was getting married to a man named Charles, who owned 3 car dealerships and wore his confidence the way other men wore cologne. Too much, detectable from across a room. The wedding was being held at a private estate outside the city, the kind of venue that required a dress code just to park your car. 3 weeks, 200 guests. And me, Amelia Carter, 27 years old, a catering server who picked up extra shifts to cover the rent gap when her roommate moved out without notice, arriving alone for the 3rd family event in a row. I could already hear my aunt's voice. Still no one special? A girl your age, Amelia. You should really be thinking about... And my mother's carefully arranged expression, the one that wasn't quite a frown but lived in the same neighborhood. And Vanessa herself, beautiful in white, glancing across the reception hall, with those eyes that had spent a lifetime measuring me and finding me a fraction short of enough. I got up, made real coffee this time, stood by the narrow window of my apartment, and watched the street below wake itself into motion. A delivery man, 2 pigeons arguing over something, a black SUV idling at the curb with the quiet authority of a vehicle that belonged to someone who never had to hurry. I didn't think about the SUV then. I should have. But I was too busy scrolling through my contacts, counting the men I could plausibly call and ask to pretend to love me for a weekend, and arriving at a number that was, without exaggeration, 0. The restaurant where I worked 3 nights a week was called Vela. It occupied the top floor of a building in the financial district, all dark wood paneling and amber lighting, and the kind of silence that wealthy people paid a premium to eat inside. My job was invisible work. The choreography of plates, the refilling of glasses before they were empty enough for guests to notice, the art of moving through a room without disturbing it. I was good at invisible. That Thursday evening, 2 weeks and 6 days before Vanessa's wedding, the private dining room had been reserved for a party of 8. I knew this because Marcus, the floor manager, pulled me aside before service and said, with his particular brand of understated gravity, "Table 9 tonight needs your full attention. No mistakes, Amelia. These are not people who forgive mistakes." I'd heard variations of that speech before. Vela attracted its share of clients who expected perfection as a baseline. I nodded, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, and went to check the table setting. The private room sat behind a frosted glass door at the far end of the hall. I pushed it open at 7:30 to perform a final check. Water glasses, bread service, the precise angles of silverware. And that was when I noticed him. He was early. The rest of his party hadn't arrived, and he sat alone at the head of the table with the stillness of a man who was never truly still. Dark suit, white shirt with the top 2 buttons undone, and along the column of his throat, ink. A tattoo that climbed from his collarbone upward, intricate dark patterns that disappeared beneath his collar, like a story with its most important pages hidden. His hair was black and swept back with the kind of effortless precision that looked like it had never required effort at all. He was looking at his phone. He didn't look up when I entered. I moved to the far side of the table, adjusted a water glass that didn't need adjusting, and told myself that the sudden awareness prickling across the back of my neck was nothing more than the air conditioning. The bread service. His voice was low, accented faintly, the vowel shaped somewhere other than here. He still hadn't looked up. It comes with butter or oil? Both, sir. The butter is truffle-infused and the oil is… Oil. A pause. And tell the kitchen not to rush the first course. Of course. I turned to leave. That was when my elbow caught the edge of the tray stand I'd failed to notice was directly behind me, the one I had absolutely not placed in that position, and therefore had every right to be surprised by. And the entire thing tilted, sending a full water carafe in a perfect arc directly toward the man at the head of the table. Time did something strange. It slowed just enough for me to see the carafe falling, to understand precisely what was about to happen, and to be completely unable to stop it. The water caught the edge of the table and redirected, missing him by a margin I could only describe as miraculous. But the carafe itself struck the floor with a sound like a small catastrophe, glass fracturing across the dark hardwood in every direction. Silence. I stood in the wreckage with my heart somewhere in the vicinity of my throat, and finally, he looked up. His eyes were dark. Not dramatically dark. Not the manufactured darkness of someone performing mystery, but the kind of darkness that simply was. The way deep water is dark, not because it's hiding something, but because light doesn't reach that far down. He looked at me with an expression that was almost nothing, almost entirely neutral, and that almost was the most frightening thing about it. "I'm so sorry," I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended. I can't. I'll have this cleaned up immediately. I'm so sorry." He set his phone on the table, unhurried. The way a man sets something down when he has decided, quietly and without announcement, that it now has his full attention. "Are you hurt?" he asked. The question was so unexpected that I forgot for a full second what words were. No, I'm fine. I'm sorry about the… You said that." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something adjacent. "Look at me." I looked at him. I didn't mean to. My eyes had been fixed on the shattered glass, on the mess, on the disaster I had created. But something in the way he said it made looking at him feel less like a choice and more like gravity. "Your hand," he said. I glanced down. There was a thin line of red across my palm where a fragment of glass had caught me. I hadn't felt it until that moment, and then I felt it all at once. "It's nothing," I said automatically. He didn't respond to that. Instead, he reached across the table and lifted the cloth napkin from the nearest place setting, held it out toward me with a patience that felt almost dangerous, the way very deep water feels dangerous. Not because it threatens you, but because it offers no resistance at all. I took it. Our fingers didn't touch. But for a moment, the napkin hung between us, like something neither of us had quite released. And the room felt smaller than it had 60 seconds ago. "What's your name?" he asked. Behind me, I heard the dining room door open. Voices, footsteps, his other guests arriving, the sound of the world re-entering. Marcus's voice somewhere in the hallway, professional and apologetic, managing. I should have left. I should have excused myself, retreated, disappeared back into the invisibility that was my particular skill set. "Amelia," I said instead. He repeated it once, under his breath, as though he were filing it somewhere. Then his attention shifted to the arriving guests, and the moment closed like a door, and I gathered the broken glass with shaking hands and told myself the cut on my palm was the only thing that had left a mark. I was wrong about that, but I wouldn't know it for another 3 days. Not until the envelope arrived at Vela's staff entrance with my name on the outside and a card inside that read, in clean, precise handwriting, "I have a proposal that might interest you. J." Below it, a phone number. I stood in the narrow corridor between the kitchen and the service hall, holding a stranger's card, with my sister's wedding invitation folded in my apron pocket, and felt the particular vertigo of a woman standing at the exact edge of a decision she already knows she shouldn't make. I called the number on a Wednesday morning, standing outside my apartment building in the cold, because my walls felt too close for a conversation I hadn't yet decided to have. It rang twice. Amelia. Not a question. He already knew it was me, which meant he'd saved my number somewhere between handing me that card and now, and that small detail unsettled me in a way I couldn't fully articulate. Like discovering someone had been reading a book you thought only you owned. You left me a card, I said. Brilliant opening, truly inspired. I did. A pause, and in the background I caught the faint sound of another voice. Male, low, speaking in Korean, followed by silence, as though a door had been closed. Are you free this afternoon? That depends on what free means in this context. Something shifted in his voice. Not warmth exactly, but the suggestion of it. The way you can smell rain before a single drop has fallen. It means coffee, a public place. You can leave whenever you choose. I should have said no. I knew the shape of that word perfectly well. I'd been using it my whole life on things that frightened me. But Vanessa's wedding was 23 days away, and my list of viable options remained exactly 0. And sometimes desperation wears the mask of courage just long enough to get you into trouble. Fine, I said. 1 hour. He chose a hotel lobby cafe in the financial district. Quiet for that hour, all marble floors and low conversation. The kind of place where discretion was built into the architecture. I arrived first, which I suspected he'd anticipated, and selected a table near the window, with the particular anxiety of someone who wanted to see him before he saw her. I needn't have bothered. He arrived with the quiet efficiency of weather. Suddenly simply there, black coat, dark eyes sweeping the room once in a way that had nothing to do with looking for me, and everything to do with cataloging exits. 2 men followed at a distance that was close enough to be deliberate and far enough to seem casual. They took positions near the entrance without being asked. He sat across from me. No greeting, no preamble. He set one phone on the table, kept a second in his inside pocket. I caught the edge of it when he removed his coat, and looked at me with that same almost expression from the dining room. The tattoos at his throat were visible again above his collar, dark ink against skin, and I made a conscious effort to maintain eye contact. You read my card, he said. I wouldn't have called otherwise. No. He studied me for a moment. You're practical. I noticed that the other night. You were more concerned about the mess than about yourself. The mess was my fault. The tray stand was not placed by you. I watched you enter the room. He said it without inflection, as a simple correction of fact, and it took me a full 3 seconds to process that he had been watching me from the moment I walked through that door, despite every impression he'd given of looking at his phone. Tell me about the wedding. I blinked. Excuse me? You have a folded envelope in the left pocket of your coat. You've touched it twice since you sat down. It's not a bill. People hold those differently. He tilted his head just slightly. A wedding invitation. Someone else's. The coffee arrived. He hadn't ordered, but a cup appeared in front of him anyway, and I understood then that this was simply how his world operated. Needs anticipated, arrangements made, friction dissolved before it could form. My sister's, I said, wrapping both hands around my own cup. 3 weeks. And you need someone to attend with you. I need someone to attend with me convincingly enough that my family believes I have a life outside of carrying other people's dinner plates. I hadn't meant to say it quite that honestly. Something about his directness made filters feel inefficient. I realize how that sounds. It sounds honest. He lifted his coffee. Why me? I don't actually know anything about you. That's not an answer. I exhaled. Because you left me a card that said you had a proposal, and I'm out of options. and you are the only person who has looked directly at me in a professional setting in longer than I care to admit." He set his cup down. His gaze hadn't moved from my face through any of this, and there was something exhausting and electric about being the subject of that kind of attention, like standing in a spotlight you hadn't auditioned for. "My name is Jae-hyun," he said. "I'm 31. I run import and export operations across several markets." A measured pause on that phrase, import and export, that told me it was true and also incomplete. "I have reasons of my own for wanting to attend a social event as someone's guest rather than as myself. Your situation is convenient. Mine may be useful to you." "What reasons?" "The kind I don't discuss in hotel lobbies," said without apology, without edge. Simply a boundary, stated as plainly as a wall. "What I will tell you is this. I will play whatever role you need convincingly. I will not embarrass you. I will not disappear halfway through." His dark eyes held something I couldn't name. "And no one at that wedding will treat you as though you are less than exactly what you deserve to be treated as." The way he said it landed somewhere unexpected, soft and certain at once, and I hated that it did. "You don't know what I deserve," I said. "Not yet." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small card. Different from the last one, cream-colored, heavier stock. He slid it across the table. It had an address on it, nothing else. "Think about it. If you decide yes, come Saturday at noon. I'll need to know details about your family, your sister, what this gathering requires of us, and if I decide no..." He stood, lifting his coat with the economy of someone who never performed unnecessary gestures. "Then I hope your cut heals cleanly." His eyes dropped briefly to my right hand, where the thin line from the glass was still faintly visible, already fading. It looked shallow enough. He walked away. His 2 guards fell into place behind him without a word exchanged, without a glance or a signal that I could detect, and the 3 of them moved through the lobby like a current through water, noticeable only by the way everything else adjusted around them. I sat with my coffee going cold, and the card with the address between my fingers, and told myself I was going to go home and text Vanessa that I was coming alone and she could arrange the seating however she liked. I told myself that for approximately 14 hours. Saturday came with thin autumn sunlight, and the address in my phone, and the particular recklessness that arrives when you've spent too many nights staring at a ceiling shaped like something mid-flight. The building was in a quieter part of the city. A residential tower, doorman, the kind of understated wealth that didn't need to announce itself. I gave my name at the desk. The doorman made a call. Within 40 seconds, a different man appeared, early 30s, broad-shouldered, watchful, and introduced himself only as Min before guiding me to an elevator that required a key card. The apartment occupied the top floor. When the doors opened, I stepped directly into a living space that was large and sparsely furnished and inexplicably calming. Clean lines, dark wood, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city like a painting someone had decided to keep rather than sell. Books in 2 languages on built-in shelves. A single orchid on the kitchen counter, white, slightly past its peak bloom but not yet gone. Jae-hyun was standing at the windows with his back to me when I arrived, phone to his ear, speaking in Korean. He held up one finger without turning around, a gesture that managed to be both dismissive and welcoming, the way only a certain kind of man can hold 2 contradictions in a single motion. I waited. Min stationed himself near the elevator and became architecturally still. When Jae-hyun ended the call, he turned, and in the full afternoon light, I saw him differently than I had in the amber warmth of the restaurant, or the controlled neutrality of the hotel. Here, something in his face was closer to the surface. Not vulnerable. That word would have been wrong, like calling the ocean shallow because you could see the color of it. But present, in a way that the other settings hadn't allowed. "You came," he said. "I came," I confirmed. He gestured to the seating area, low sofa, coffee table with a folder already laid open on it. All business, all architecture. I sat. He sat across from me, forearms resting on his knees, the ink at his throat catching the light. "Tell me about your family," he said. So I did. I told him about Vanessa and her talent for making love feel like a performance review. About my mother, who meant well and expressed it badly. About my father, who had died 4 years ago and whose absence sat at the center of every family gathering like a room everyone walked around. About Charles, the groom, whose 3 car dealerships I privately thought were compensation for something. About my aunt who asked questions like a prosecutor and called it interest. Jae-hyun listened without interrupting. He asked 2 questions the entire time. Precise, surgical questions that extracted exactly what he needed. And when I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Your father," he said. "What was he like?" I hadn't expected that. Of all the logistical details I'd offered, his attention had settled on the one thing I hadn't offered as information. "Quiet," I said after a moment. "Steady. The kind of man who showed up." My throat tightened briefly. He would have hated this wedding. Too much performance. Jae-hyun held my gaze for a long moment, and something passed through his expression. Not pity, which I would have resented, but recognition, as though that particular species of grief was not unfamiliar terrain. "I'll be there," he said. "I'll be whoever they need me to be." I nodded, reaching for my bag to leave. His next word stopped me at the edge of the sofa. "One condition." I looked at him. "If anyone at that wedding makes you feel the way your sister's texts make you feel..." He let the sentence breathe for a moment. "Tell me. Don't manage it alone." The simplicity of it was disarming enough to make me forget, briefly, the 2 guards outside and the keycard elevator and the folder on the coffee table that I suspected contained information about me that no one should have been able to gather in 3 days. "Okay," I said, walking back to the elevator. I felt his attention follow me the way afternoon light follows a window. Constant, warm at the edges, impossible to fully step out of. I didn't look back, but I felt it, every step. The estate where Vanessa was getting married existed in that particular category of beautiful that feels designed to make you aware of everything you lack. Stone gates, a gravel drive lined with trimmed hedges that had probably been shaped by someone whose entire profession was trimming hedges. A main house with cream-colored columns and ivy that climbed the walls in careful, curated patterns, as though even the plants understood they were part of an aesthetic. When our car, Jae-hyun's car, black, immaculate, driven by a man named Dae, who had not spoken a single word during the 40-minute drive, turned through those gates, I felt the familiar contraction in my chest that all of my sister's milestones produced. That particular mixture of love and inadequacy that I had never quite found the words for. "Breathe," Jae-hyun said quietly, beside me. I hadn't realized I'd stopped. He wasn't looking at me. His gaze was on the window, cataloging the grounds the way he cataloged every space he entered, methodically, without appearing to. But his hand moved from where it had rested on his knee and settled over mine on the seat between us, briefly, the way you might steady something that was about to tip. Then it was gone. "I'm fine," I said. "You've said that before." The corner of his mouth shifted. It was equally unconvincing then. The car stopped at the entrance. Dae opened the door from outside, and I stepped onto the gravel in heels that I'd practiced walking in twice this week, and Jae-hyun was beside me before I'd finished straightening. Close enough that the warmth of him was perceptible. Distant enough that nothing could be mistaken for performance. One of his hands found the small of my back. Light pressure, present but not insistent. And we walked toward the entrance together in a way that felt, against all reasonable expectation, completely natural. My mother found us in approximately 45 seconds. She came across the entrance hall with the momentum of a woman who'd been watching the door, which she absolutely had been, and her eyes went immediately from my face to Jae-hyun and then back to my face with an expression I had never seen her wear before. Genuine, unguarded surprise, chased quickly by something warmer. Amelia. She kissed my cheek. Her perfume was the same it had always been, something floral and anchoring. Then she looked at Jae-hyun with the focused attention of a woman who had raised 2 daughters and developed, as a survival mechanism, the ability to assess a man's character in under a minute. "Mom, this is Jae-hyun," I said. We've been seeing each other for a few months. We had practiced this, the timeline, the meeting story, a mutual acquaintance, a dinner, nothing implausible. Jae-hyun had suggested it with the efficiency of someone constructing a structure he intended to hold weight. He extended his hand to my mother, and something in the gesture, unhurried, direct, the eye contact he maintained, made her shake it and then hold it for a moment longer than the situation required. "Eleanor Carter," she said. "It's very nice to meet you." "The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Carter." His accent, faint as it was, gave the formal phrase a particular texture. "Amelia has spoken about you." My mother's expression completed its journey from surprise to something approaching delight, and I made a note that Jae-hyun deployed charm the way he deployed everything else, sparingly, precisely, with surgical effect. Vanessa found us during the cocktail hour in the garden. She came with a glass of champagne, and Charles at her elbow, and a smile that managed to be both genuinely warm and faintly evaluating, a skill she had perfected over 30 years of being the beautiful sister, which was not a cruelty I permitted myself often, but was true in the specific way that certain true things were. She was radiant, bridal in a way that transcended the white dress. There was happiness in her that I recognized as real, and it softened everything, including me. "You came," she said, embracing me with her free arm. She smelled of roses and expensive hair products. "And you brought—" Her eyes found Jae-hyun over my shoulder and performed the same assessment my mother's had, though Vanessa's version was faster and considerably less subtle. "Oh." "Oh?" I repeated. "Nothing. I just—" She composed herself with visible effort. "Hi. I'm Vanessa, the bride. Jae-hyun." He shook her hand, then Charles's, and managed to make Charles feel both acknowledged and, somehow, gently outranked, a thing I suspected Jae-hyun could accomplish with most rooms without any particular effort. Charles said something about the drive out and whether we'd had trouble with traffic, and Jae-hyun answered him in the easy tone of a man comfortable with small talk even when he found it entirely unnecessary. And I stood slightly to his left and watched my sister watching Jae-hyun with an expression that said, clearly, "Where did you find him? And why have you never mentioned him?" It was, I realized with a complicated rush of feeling, the first time in recent memory that I had arrived somewhere and not immediately felt 3 inches shorter than everyone else in the room. Then my aunt appeared. Patricia Carter was 62 years old, had strong opinions about everything, and treated family gatherings as opportunities for investigative journalism. She arrived at my elbow with a gin and tonic and the momentum of a woman who had been working toward this conversation since she spotted me across the garden. "Amelia." Kiss on the cheek. Then, without pause, pivoting to Jae-hyun. "And who is this?" I opened my mouth. Jae-hyun was already there. "Jae-hyun Shin." He offered his hand. "I've heard quite a bit about you, actually. Amelia mentioned you have a talent for finding the best restaurants in any city you visit." My aunt blinked. That was, in fact, something she prided herself on enormously, and I had mentioned it to Jae-hyun on Saturday as a throwaway detail. He had apparently filed it. "Well," Patricia said, visibly recalibrating. Yes, I do." "Do you have a preference for cuisine?" "Korean, obviously," he said, with a brief glance at me that carried the ghost of private amusement. "But I've developed an appreciation for Italian in the last few years." My aunt launched into a detailed account of a restaurant in Florence she'd visited in the spring, and Jae-hyun listened with every appearance of genuine interest. And I stood between them and felt something unknot itself in my chest. The trouble arrived at dinner. His name was Brandon. He was 30, the groom's younger brother, and he had the particular confidence of a man who had been told he was charming often enough to have stopped questioning it. He was seated 2 places down from me at the rehearsal dinner table, and he spent the first course directing conversation at me with the pointed interest of someone who has decided, without consulting the other person, that they are going to be interesting to him this evening. "So how long have you two been together?" he asked, gesturing between Jae-hyun and me. "A few months," I said. "Funny, Vanessa never mentioned you had a boyfriend." He smiled. It was the kind of smile that knew it was a smile. "She talks about you a lot. Said you were, what was the word? Focused on work." "She did," I said carefully. "Nothing wrong with that?" He leaned slightly closer. "I just figured someone like you would be, I don't know, around more, bringing someone to these things. Someone like you." The phrase settled against my skin like something cold. I knew exactly what it meant, and the specific species of small it was designed to make me feel, dressed up in the language of observation, so that calling it unkind would make me seem sensitive. I felt it before I saw it. Jae-hyun's attention shifting. He had been speaking to the person on his other side, a low, polite conversation, and he hadn't appeared to be listening to Brandon at all. "Amelia is at most events she chooses to attend," Jae-hyun said. His voice was its usual measured register. He hadn't turned to face Brandon directly. He was reaching for his water glass, entirely unhurried. "The distinction matters." Brandon paused. "Sorry?" "You said she doesn't come to these things." Jae-hyun set his glass down and looked at Brandon for the first time. Not aggressively, not with any visible heat. Simply looked, with those dark eyes that contain no excess. "She comes to the ones worth her time." The table had acquired a very slight, very attentive quiet. Brandon smiled again, though it had lost some of its sureness. "Right, of course." Jae-hyun returned to his previous conversation, as though the interruption had not occurred. Under the table, his hand found mine, briefly, and pressed once. Not possessively, not for performance. The way you press something to remind it that it's solid, that it exists, that it is not, despite evidence the world sometimes offered, invisible. I stared at my plate and breathed through the sudden tightness behind my eyes. Later, when the dinner concluded and the guests filtered onto the terrace for evening drinks, Jae-hyun stayed close. Not attached, never theatrical about it, but close enough that when my aunt tried to lead me into a corner conversation about my career trajectory, he appeared at my side with 2 glasses of sparkling water and a timing so precise it could not have been coincidence. "I need to steal her for a moment," he told Patricia pleasantly. "Forgive me." He guided me to the edge of the terrace, where the garden lights softened everything and the sound of other conversations blurred into background texture. We stood at the stone railing and looked out at the dark shapes of hedges against the night sky. "You didn't have to do that," I said. "At dinner, with Brandon." "I know." "He wasn't worth the attention." "No." A pause. "But you are." The garden was very quiet at its edges. Somewhere behind us, someone laughed. Vanessa's laugh, bright and carrying. And the sound of it moved through me with the particular tenderness of loving someone complicated. I turned to look at Jae-hyun. In the low light, the tattoos at his throat were barely visible. The sharp lines of his face softened without being diminished. He was looking at the garden, not at me, but in the way that people look at one thing when they are paying attention to another. "Why did you really want to come to this?" I asked quietly. He considered the question. Long enough that I thought he might not answer. My world, he said finally, requires that I always be exactly one thing. There are no rooms where I can simply sit at a table and talk about restaurants. He paused. This was one of those rooms. It was not a complete answer. I understood that. But it was, I suspected, a true one. And from him, I was beginning to understand, true and complete were not always the same offering. I nodded. We stood in the warm dark for another moment, shoulder to shoulder, not touching. The space between us carrying the quiet weight of something that had stopped being pretend sometime in the last several hours without either of us officially noting the transition. Then Min appeared at the terrace entrance, silent, watchful, and Jaehyun's posture shifted, barely perceptibly. And I understood that whatever ease the evening had allowed was narrowing now, that his other world was tapping at the glass, patient and unbothered, and certain that it would always, eventually, be let back in. 5 more minutes, Jaehyun said, without looking at Min. Min withdrew. I said nothing, but I kept standing there, at the edge of the lit garden, for exactly 5 more minutes. The wedding day arrived wrapped in October light, the kind that looks warm from behind glass and carries an unexpected chill the moment you step into it. I was in my designated room at the estate by 7 in the morning, sitting at the vanity in the dress I'd spent 3 months saving for, deep burgundy, fitted at the waist, the kind of dress that required you to decide before you put it on that you were willing to be seen. My reflection looked back at me with an expression I was still calibrating. Not quite the woman who carried plates through amber-lit dining rooms, not quite whoever it was I was becoming. Vanessa's maid of honor knocked at 8 to pull me into the bridal suite preparations, and I spent the next 2 hours in the warm chaos of hairpins and borrowed mascara, and my sister in white, laughing too loudly at things that weren't that funny, because she was nervous and happy in equal measure, and didn't know what else to do with either. I held her bouquet while the stylist made a final adjustment to her veil, and she looked at me in the mirror with an expression I hadn't seen from her in years. Unguarded, a little raw. "He's real, isn't he?" she said. Not accusatory. Quiet. "What?" "Jaehyun." She turned from the mirror to face me directly. "I've been watching people my whole adult life, Amelia. Comes with the territory of caring too much about everyone's opinion." A small, self-aware smile. "He looks at you like you're the only thing in a room worth orienting toward. Men don't fake that. Not that well." I held her bouquet and said nothing, because there was no version of the truth I could offer her that was both honest and simple. "I just want you to be okay," Vanessa said. I know I'm not always." She stopped, tried again. "I know the way I push comes out wrong sometimes." "Sometimes," I agreed gently. She laughed, and it was her real laugh, shorter, less polished than the one she deployed socially. "I'm sorry. For the texts, for making you feel like showing up alone was a failure instead of just a Tuesday." Something loosened behind my sternum. The particular knot that had lived there since that first text message, maybe longer, maybe for years assembled from smaller tightenings that I'd never individually addressed. "Thank you," I said. She squeezed my hand once, quick and firm, and then the moment folded back into the organized noise of preparations, and I carried it with me like something I intended to keep. I saw Jaehyun across the ceremony lawn 20 minutes before the processional. He was standing near the far edge of the seated guests, speaking quietly with Day, and he was wearing a charcoal suit that I had not seen before, and which fit him with the precision of something made rather than bought. He had his back partially to me. Min stood nearby with the particular stillness that I was learning to read as alertness rather than calm. Then, as though something had shifted in the air pressure, he turned. Across the rows of white chairs and flower arrangements and guests settling into their seats, across all that curated October elegance, he looked directly at me. not searching. He'd already found me, somehow, before he turned. His expression didn't change perceptibly, but his chin lifted barely, the way someone lifts their face toward something they've been waiting for. I walked toward him because standing still suddenly required more effort than moving. "You look," he began, when I reached him. "Don't," I said, because I could feel the particular vulnerability of the moment, and I didn't yet have the structural integrity for a compliment from him delivered in that register. The corner of his mouth curved. He didn't push. Instead, he offered his arm, and I took it, and we found our seats as the string quartet shifted into something soft and anticipatory. And I was aware of him beside me the way you are aware of a fire in a cold room. Not from looking at it, but from the consistent warmth it produces in the space around it. The ceremony was 23 minutes long. Vanessa cried twice. Charles, to his modest credit, managed to hold her gaze through the vows with a steadiness that revised my opinion of him slightly upward. When the officiant reached the part about choosing each other through difficulty and change, I looked at my hands in my lap, and I felt Jae-hyun's attention move to the side of my face, and I did not look back. But I was aware of it the entire time, like a question I wasn't ready to answer out loud. The reception unraveled the carefully maintained fiction in a way I should have anticipated but didn't. It began with Brandon. He had been drinking with the unchecked enthusiasm of someone who had decided the open bar was personally addressed to him, and by the time the reception moved into the main hall for dinner and dancing, he had located a kind of liquid confidence that his sober version hadn't fully needed. He found me near the edge of the dance floor while Jae-hyun was briefly across the room. I'd watched him step away to take a call, just 3 minutes. The phone pressed close, his face arranged into the neutral mask that meant whatever he was hearing required his full professional attention. 3 minutes was enough. "No handler tonight?" Brandon said, appearing at my left elbow with a glass that was more than half empty. "He stepped away," I said evenly. "Right." He positioned himself slightly too close. Not threateningly, more in the manner of someone testing boundaries through increments. "I looked him up, Jae-hyun Shin." He said the name with the particular emphasis of someone who had found something and was deciding how to use it. "Interesting guy. Import-export, is that right? Must be a fascinating business." My chest tightened. "It is," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I just wonder." Brandon tilted his head, studied me with the unfocused perceptiveness of someone whose inhibitions had metabolized away. "Does a girl like you actually know what kind of man you're standing next to? Or is the suit doing too much of the talking?" "A girl like me," I said slowly. "I don't mean anything by it." He smiled. "I just mean you seem—" He searched for the word with theatrical effort. "Sheltered. And some men, the impressive-looking ones especially, they're very good at showing you exactly what they want you to see." It was not wrong, precisely. That was what made it land. It pressed directly on the bruise I'd been protecting since the hotel lobby, since the keycard elevator, since every moment I'd pushed away the questions I wasn't supposed to ask about import and export and multiple phones and men who swept rooms before speaking. I opened my mouth to respond, and Jae-hyun was there. I hadn't heard him return. I hadn't seen him cross the room. He was simply present beside me, the way he was often present, without preamble, without announcement. He did not touch Brandon. He did not raise his voice or alter his expression. He looked at him with that level, depthless gaze, and the quality of the silence that followed was extraordinary. "Amelia." His voice was addressed to me, not to Brandon, which was somehow more effective than the alternative. "Come with me." It was not a demand. It never sounded like a demand from him, which was the remarkable thing, because it always carried the absolute certainty of one. I went. He placed his hand at my back, and we moved toward the dance floor as the band shifted into something slower, and Brandon's voice did not follow us. because some silences make very clear that following would be inadvisable. On the dance floor, Jae-hyun turned to face me, and I put my hand in his extended one, and his other hand settled at my waist, and we began to move in the easy, unhurried way of two people who had not actually discussed whether they knew how to dance together, but were, apparently, discovering that they did. "You were gone 3 minutes," I said quietly. "I know." Something tightened briefly in his jaw. "It won't happen again tonight. It's not your job to—" "Amelia." He said my name the way he always said it, filing it, weighting it, making it feel like it meant more than 4 syllables. "Let me." I looked up at him. We were close, the way dancing required. And at this distance, the tattoos at his throat were a pattern I could almost trace. Dark ink beneath the warm reception light. His eyes were on my face with an attention that was no longer strategic, no longer the studied observation of someone running a calculation. It was something else, something that had been becoming something else for days, and was no longer bothering to pretend otherwise. "Brandon said something that wasn't entirely wrong," I said, because honesty with him had become habitual in a way I hadn't consciously chosen, about not knowing what I'm standing next to. His hand at my waist tightened, barely. "No," he agreed. "It wasn't entirely wrong." "Tell me something true then." He was quiet for several measures of music. Around us, other couples moved, and Vanessa danced with Charles near the center of the floor, and the evening held its breath, or I imagined that it did. "I haven't brought anyone into my life voluntarily in a very long time," he said finally. "The last person I trusted completely." A pause. That ended in a way that made trust feel like a liability. His eyes stayed on mine. I stopped going to rooms where I could just sit at a table. I stopped allowing things that didn't serve a purpose. "I serve a purpose," I said softly. "That's what this is." That's what it was. The distinction was quiet and enormous. What it is now is a different question. The song ended. Neither of us moved immediately, the way you sometimes stand in a doorway between 2 rooms, not fully in either. Then his second phone vibrated, and his expression shifted with a swiftness that was almost physical, like a door closing, not in my face, but of necessity, the way blast doors close not out of hostility but out of architecture. "I need an hour," he said. He scanned the room once, and Min appeared from somewhere within 20 seconds. "Min will stay close. Don't go anywhere with Brandon. Don't go anywhere alone." The protectiveness of it was not subtle. It landed with weight. "Jae-hyun, 1 hour." His eyes came back to mine, and for a brief moment the door opened again, just fractionally. "I'll explain everything tonight. You deserve that." He left with Dae through a side corridor, and Min took an unobtrusive position near the hall entrance, and I stood at the edge of the dance floor in my burgundy dress with the full understanding that I was somewhere in the middle of a story, whose first chapter had been about a wedding, and whose actual subject was something far larger, far more complicated, and somehow, impossibly, far more real. My sister appeared at my side with 2 glasses of champagne and the expression of a woman who had been watching. "Amelia," she said carefully, "who exactly is he?" I took the glass. The bubbles rose and broke at the surface the way questions do when you've been holding them underwater. "I'm not entirely sure," I said honestly. "But I think I'm about to find out." He came back in 53 minutes. I know, because I counted them. Not obsessively, not with the anxious clock-watching of someone waiting to be disappointed, but with the quiet attention of a woman who had decided, somewhere between the dance floor and her second glass of champagne, that she was done pretending she didn't care about the answer. I was sitting in a small antechamber off the main hall when he found me. A reading room the estate kept for guests who needed a moment away from the orchestrated joy of other people's celebrations. Min had guided me there without explanation when the reception noise became too much, and I had sat in a wingback chair with my shoes off, and my champagne finished, and my sister's words turning slowly in my mind. Who exactly is he? Jae-hyun appeared in the doorway. He'd loosened his tie, the only visible evidence that the last hour had required something of him. He looked at me in the chair, shoes beside me on the floor, and something in his expression shifted from the controlled blankness of someone returning from difficulty to something quieter and more exposed. He closed the door, sat in the chair across from me without the usual economy of his movements, heavier, somehow, present in a way that felt costly. "The call tonight," he began. "There's a man who has been attempting to use my organization's name to conduct business he has no right to conduct. It creates problems. It required managing." "Managing," I repeated, "legally." He said it plainly, without defensiveness. "I have lawyers, Amelia. I use them." A pause. "I want to tell you what I am and what I am not, because you asked for something true and you deserve more than half of one." I waited. My family has operated in certain markets for 2 generations, the kind of markets that exist in the space between what is documented and what is not. He held my gaze steadily. "I am not a good man by every definition of the word, but I have a code. I have lines I don't cross. And I have spent the last 3 years pulling my operations toward something that won't require my successor, if I ever allow myself one, to inherit the parts I'm not proud of." The room was very still. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you're not a woman who can be managed with half-truths, and I stopped wanting to manage you approximately 4 days ago." His jaw tightened briefly. "And because Brandon was right, that you deserve to know what you're standing next to. He was wrong about everything else." I looked at him. This man with ink climbing his throat and dark eyes that held entire rooms without effort, and a stillness that I now understood was not absence of feeling, but the disciplined containment of an enormous amount of it. "I'm a catering server," I said. "I have a ceiling water stain shaped like a bird. I cannot afford the restaurant where we met without the employee discount." "I know." "That doesn't frighten you off? The distance between—" I gestured vaguely at him, at the suit, at the world he occupied. "The distance," he said quietly, "is the least interesting thing about this." He leaned forward, forearms on his knees, closing the space between us by a fraction that felt enormous. "What frightens me, Amelia, is considerably more specific. It's the fact that I have thought about you every day since you walked into that dining room and knocked over a water carafe and then apologized to me while bleeding." A pause. "That is not a thing that happens to me. I don't allow things that don't serve a purpose." "You said that before." I meant it both times. The meaning just changed direction. Outside the closed door, the reception continued. Muffled music, laughter, the ordinary sounds of a celebration. My sister was dancing with her husband. My mother was probably talking to someone about the centerpieces. The world was proceeding, unconcerned. In here, something was being decided. "I'm not asking you for anything tonight," Jae-hyun said. "I'm not asking you to understand everything immediately, or to make a decision in a chair in a borrowed room at your sister's wedding." His eyes were steady. "I'm asking you to let me call you tomorrow, to let this continue in daylight, without the costume of a +1, where you can see clearly what you're considering and decide freely. And if I decide it's too complicated, then I'll accept that." He said it without flinching. "But I won't disappear quietly and pretend these days didn't reconfigure something in me. Because that would be a lie, and I don't lie to people I respect." The word respect landed differently than any of the warmer words might have. It was more solid, more load-bearing. I looked at him for a long moment. This man who had defended me without performance, who had remembered my aunt liked restaurants, and my father had been quiet and steady, and the kind of man who showed up. who had stood at the edge of a garden and asked for 5 more minutes, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to. "Call me tomorrow," I said. Something crossed his face. Not triumph. Nothing so simple. Relief, maybe. The specific relief of a man who had prepared himself for a different answer and found he hadn't needed to. He stood. I stood. We were close in the small room, the wingback chairs behind us, the muffled celebration beyond the door, and he reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear with the careful deliberateness of someone handling something they considered valuable. "Tomorrow," he said. He called the next morning at 9. I answered before the second ring. We talked for 2 hours, about his family, about mine, about the specific loneliness of being the person in every room who is working hardest to seem like they belong there. He told me about his father, who had built something from nothing and left Jaehyun both a legacy and a weight. I told him about my ceiling stain, and he laughed, a real one, brief and unguarded, and it sounded like something he didn't do often enough. It took 4 more months of careful, honest, complicated steps before I understood fully what I had walked into and chose to stay anyway. It took longer than that for his world to fully accept that I was not temporary. There were difficult evenings and questions without easy answers, and moments when the distance between his life and mine felt less like a gap and more like a canyon. But he showed up. Every time, without theater, without needing to be asked, the way my father had quietly and steadily. And I learned that the most important things rarely announce themselves. Sometimes they arrive in amber-lit rooms where you're just trying to do your job, and they look at you for the first time from across a tilting water carafe, and they say your name like they're filing it somewhere they intend to keep. I stopped managing things alone. That, in the end, was the whole story.